on our planet. And so this tree before you is actually growing in Mexico still. It's about 1,500 years old. And just imagine all the mystery within it. Is there a whole city inside the tree of some kind of creatures that live there? Or is it all a solid tree, and so on and so forth? So what I'm going to invite you to do is just for a moment, what is this spring? What was the situation that you saw outside or inside your home that is like a mystery to you? A sense of awe that we just don't fully know. I'll start, and it's opportunity to just share your name and what city or town area are you from, and then what do you find as a bit of a mystery, or a lot of a mystery maybe. As you'll notice, if you look at the picture in front where I am, you'll see a little branch. I picked it off of a ditch on a road nearby, and it was all in one bud. And my mystery of it all is that each of these has unfolded, because they were just like little knots before when I picked it off the tree, and it has broken open, and every single one of the leaves are just specially designed without a scissors to cut it. They're the same for every one of this tree. It's their earmark, you might say. Or like I went out to the garden, and the rhubarb that came up was first like a little knot, and then it gradually opened itself, and every leaf looked like a rhubarb leaf. And it's still now growing into larger size, of course. But no scissors, no nothing. All of that mystery was wrapped in that little knot, so to speak, before I got to see its beauty. What is some mystery that you have experienced this summer? Just very briefly, in a sentence or two.
Well, this is Marge McCardle, and I live in Danbury, and I live in the woods. And the mystery to me this spring and every spring is when my birds, and notice how possessive I am, my birds return, but that they know exactly the feeders to go to. They come struggling through the woods. And this week I had orioles and hummingbirds arrive at the same time, going to their right feeders and being very possessive about and territorial about what belongs to them. But I thought year after year, even if I don't have my feeders up, the specific birds go exactly to the rack where I will hang those feeders. And it amazes me that instinctively they know where to go. And needless to say, this year I almost had a welcoming party for all of them. So glad that they came back and could be there all summer with me. So it's been a great week.
Thank you, Marge.
This is Sister Carol, and I'm in Wausau. And there's my favorite flower of the spring is the dandelion, and they've just been so many of them. And this morning, the men were out mowing the lawn, and they go right over those dandelions, and before noon, they will be right back up. And it just, I wonder why they don't get cut down like the grass. Isn't that wonderful? That's such a mystery.
Thank you, Carol.
Well, my name is Joanne, and I live in Boulder Junction. I hope you can hear me. I've just kind of lost everybody's picture. But I think the mystery for me is, and this happens every spring, is when the ice goes out of the lake and all of a sudden there's water there. And I like it when the ice forms on the lake in the winter too, but it just feels so good to see the water rippling down there. And then you wonder, how does this happen? Because this year about half of our lake melted, and the other half was still very thick ice.
I was in awe of God's creation. Oh, this is Grant, in the Timber Ridge area just south of Minocqua. And I was in awe this morning of the transition of the sun coming up, night turning to day, and just the trees starting to glow with a nice gentle light. And I always in awe in the mornings, but then also in the evenings as it goes the other way to the transition period.
Thank you. Is anyone else there?
I am. I can't see anybody though for some reason. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, okay. This is Elizabeth, and I am always awed, and especially this year, I've been noticing the grass is green. You know, right where I live, and I know it's green at Marywood where we rake and such. But I don't understand how all these hills, both sides of the road, wherever you go, nobody mows them or does anything with them, and they're as green as the lawn that we work on. So somehow it's taken care of in the mystery of whatever, because yeah, the hillsides are green and nobody mowed them and raked them and did what we have to do, or what we think we have to do. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, there must be several people that were not able to arrive today as had planned. Is that true, Grant, from what you see?
There are two that I'm wondering about.
Oh, okay.
But go ahead and we'll catch them up if.
Okay. Well, in light of our mystery tree and in light of the mysteries that you have all experienced, probably at some point in your awe and wonder, something of song might have been in your memory or in your heart that you wanted to sing. And probably the one song that probably every one of us have heard and multiple times in multiple different situations is Holy God, we praise thy name. And so Grant is going to help us, and the words will be on the screen, so you can just go from there with the song. you, Grant, for getting that song together. And now we'll move to the first slide. Okay. When we were singing that song together with a chorus from another space, as we look at the graph before us here, you know, a name of God is, you know, Holy God, Holy Father, Holy Son, Holy Spirit. Often we use the word Trinity. And next. What are some names of Holy Mystery that come to your mind when you think of God? Especially God is obviously Holy Mystery. Would anyone like to bring forward a name that you can recall being used in our culture or even another culture? And you'll have to unmute yourself so you can be heard. One that comes to my mind is God of Compassion. Grant will probably just write down, okay, God of Compassion as a one name for God. You have another?
I was just reading Julianne Norwich, and she called it God is Mother.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Another one I can recall is God of a liberating God, liberating God, coming out of a scripture base.
God of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
God as love.
Thank you.
God of wisdom.
Creator God.
God of understanding.
Gracious God.
Thank you. God of life.
Sophia.
Mm.
Yep.
What do the people of Spanish background call God?
You repeat the question?
The God of the Spanish background people.
Senor.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Abba.
Mm. As you look back over the list of names that Grant has put forward here for us, is there some sense of how they kind of all fit together?
They're all positive.
They're all interconnected.
You sort of get the feeling of like you can't put it all in one word, and so you just keep expressing. We could for a long time if we took more time for it. Just so many different aspects, almost like that very large tree we saw. You know, there's just all of it helps to make it more full in our understanding.
That's like God is holy mystery.
Yeah, that's the short part of it. Next, Grant.
Oops. Hang on a second. Trying to
Number three.
Yeah, okay, we go here.
So that everything, without exception, is the outpouring of God. And probably that is why we see that outpouring in so many manifold ways. Sometimes we also say, God is infinite or primal, the first source of all that is. And yet we know that God had no beginning. God always has been. Sometimes we see in science that part of creation was made manifest in 13.7 billion years ago. However, the 13.7 billion years ago is our human way of expressing that which we can grasp a bit of from science. And yet we know we don't have a name probably for that which begins without a beginning. Do you have a comment you'd make about that sense of God had no beginning? God always was, always is, existed only as spirit. I like the picture that Grant found of the universes. We talk about galaxies, but now the scientists are even talking about universes, more than we can even grasp. Next. We could also say that somehow God poured God's self into finite visible forms, everything that we see. And in Genesis, the very beginning of the first book of the Bible, it says, and God saw that light was good. And God jointed in unity with the physical universe and became light inside of everything. God put light into everything. And the opposite of darkness, which is nothing, so to speak. And scientists that have the opportunity to visit the various parts of the wider universe are still exploring, what is that emptiness and the awesomeness of light. Where does that come from? How was that created? All things that we explore as mystery, even as we look at a plant outside as it comes out this spring. The universe has even greater awesomeness that puts us just kind of with our mouth hanging open and wondering, how could that all be? The next. then in some mysterious way, we might say Jesus was born as an expression of God being revealed to us so we could come to know more fully what it is to be fully human. In one particular place, it says that Jesus came into an already Christ-soaked world. I thought that was a powerful statement when I heard it the first time, especially. Jesus was born of a woman. However, the word Christ, more writers and people who have studied the scriptures and so forth, we know that the word Christ is not Jesus's last name, but it's another word for talking about God, Christ, Son of God, if you like that particular phrase. But that this world has been, so to speak, soaked by God's energy all over, be it the light, be it all the mysteries that you shared earlier. I never saw that word expressed quite that way until I was reading something from Elizabeth Johnson, and she said, a God-soaked world. What a powerful statement. How powerful found even in the simple leaf. Next. We could probably say with many people, including all of us maybe, all that is both the hiding place and the revelation of God. Hiding place meaning we can't see God. We can't see God visibly, but we see all the effects of God. The hiding place of God, revealing God's self. The divine presence seeks connection and communion with all that is. No separation or division, but being deeply connected, seeking ever larger circles of union. I think that's such a powerful statement that I found, seeking ever larger circles of communion. And then when we see how divided we are as countries, how divided we are even just within our own United States, how divided we can be sometimes in various circles. Maybe it's just because we haven't gone deeper into the heart of each one to see how we are all part of the light of God, part of the heart of God in a hiding place. It goes on here to say God loves things by uniting with them, not excluding them. All things visible are the revelation of God's endless, diffusive, spiritual energy. Spiritual meaning not visible, but so very strongly there. Another author said, all creatures carry the DNA of their creator. God is inherent in all things. That all life is striving toward goodness. So you want to just pause for a moment. What's a phrase in this slide that especially strikes you? In what way does it especially strike you? Would you like to share any word or phrase that really touches your heart?
Ever larger circles of union. That includes everything.
Would you like to share an example of that?
Well, you can see God in the animals, in the flowers, in the trees, and in the moon, and in people of all ages, of all creation. It just like, and then the earth, how it revolves, it just keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Starts with the little ants and builds up. The ever enlarging circles of union. God is there. They all have a purpose.
I like the phrase. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Joanne.
Oh, I like the phrase, all that is both the hiding place and the revelation of God. And as Sister Carol just said, there is where you can find God, in all of those hiding places.
As I was looking at this, all life is striving toward goodness, and it struck me just now because before I came on the screen, I was watching all the floods in Michigan, pretty close to where I grew up. So I was naming all the towns and the rivers, and I thought, golly, that's too close to home for me. So as I see all life is striving toward goodness, it just popped in my head. So what is the goodness of such things like floods? So, and then I thought about the program as mystery, so it is.
For me, it's the phrase connection and communion. And I'm getting more and more seeing that God is outside the walls of the church. I mean, God is in scripture, and that's the way I was brought up and everything. But the idea, it's God's out of the Sunday morning box outside of church. And my spiritual director and I have been working with that a lot. You know, I talk about reading the Bible a lot, but what about the Bible of nature? What about the Bible of creation, which is actually the first written Bible, or the first Bible?
I just think of seeks connection and communion. And it seems like we get really unhappy inside, maybe even hiding it, when there isn't connection and communion. There's something about how God has put something into our beings that calls us to connection and communion. One of our staff people had an email to us today saying that her cat had, I don't know how many kittens yesterday, and yet they all huddled together because that's how they've been felt best. They came alive, you might say, through that connection and communion. And now they're all being called to be their own special uniqueness. And yet they all come together when they want to sleep, or when they want to, when they're frightened or need something. It shows itself in just everything you can imagine. Except our government and some other things we won't get into.
Yeah.
Should we take the next slide? We see here that Jesus, the human revelation of God, so to speak, that Christ is God, and Jesus is Christ's historical manifestation in time. that Jesus is not just God and not just man, but God and human together, which we know is this mystery in itself, and yet it's powerful energy for us as we think about how each one of us is human, but we have God hiding in us, so to speak. We have God within us, guiding us, putting in energy like communion and all forms of connectings, energy, connecting energy. So Jesus showed us what the full human might look like if we strive to live into it, as Jesus did. He had hurts and he had pains and he had struggles with Peter and, all of that kind of thing. And yet the scriptures, in their own special way, show us how some connecting and communion was going on wherever Jesus went. And that you and I all have the same challenge to strive to live as Jesus brought it forward for us in human form. The next slide, please. In the early 2nd century, and this is skipping a lot of details, but just for today, the church began to call itself Catholic, meaning universal. Later, not too long later, the word Roman was added into Roman Catholic, and pretty soon through time has formed into multi-separated groups, divided and not as inclusive, and does not give an inclusive message. But variations can be very enriching in helping to come to greater truth. And yet we know sometimes the separated groups are so resistant, even in the Roman Catholic communion, supposedly, that we struggle with making the word communion and connecting the energy that God has put out there for us as humans. So in our efforts to want to follow Jesus, to be godlike, we struggle with our separations within the Roman Catholic as well as in many other connected but pretty separated groupings. How can we open our hearts and our minds to drawing further into communion? The Democrats and the Republicans and the ta-da and the ta-da and ta-da. How do we help each other see into the wisdom that our differences can bring into communion? Next slide, please. In a little bit, we're going to share a film with all of us that's called Beyond Theology. And so we have here that God is hidden in all that is, including our own lives. And how can that relationship be fostered through what Jesus did to show us the way? And so with that being said, I think what we can do, Grant, is jump into the next part, the film. I think that might be helpful to do.
we used to separate divine from human as if they were two separate categories, and we located the divine up in the sky somewhere and the human down here on the earth. And I think that's all wrong.
A retired Episcopal Bishop of Newark, New Jersey, John Shelby Spong continues to actively advocate a more progressive spirituality, particularly in regard to Christian churches and organizations. He sees the need for a major reformation, speaking of a new Christianity for a new world.
I think if we would develop a church or a religious community or a religious faith that takes people as they are and says, we're going to walk with you into the mystery of God. And there are no roadmaps. We can't tell you what you have to do. We can't tell you what the rules are. You got to sort of discover them as you go. And as you do that, you honor people's questions instead of pretending that you have the answers. And you let people journey at different paces.
Many people today are on a journey of sorts, looking for answers to the questions they have about religion and spirituality. The director of the Center for the Study of Religion at Princeton University, Robert Wolfnow, has conducted hundreds of interviews to determine how attitudes and beliefs are changing.
What I find in talking to people at length, several hours at a time about faith and spirituality, is that almost everybody has a story of their own to tell. I've sometimes called this a core narrative because it gives a certain amount of coherence to a person's life. It tells a story of how you started out and where you were and what you experienced and how you've changed and maybe how you are different from your parents and where you think you're headed, what life is all about. What people really sense as important is some experience they've had that moved them in some way outside of their daily concerns and gave them a sense of awe and wonder, and they like to think of that as God, but they're probably concerned that even the word God doesn't quite capture that experience.
When I think about God, I borrow a phrase first from a German theologian named Paul Tillich, who was instrumental in shaping my life. And Tillich described God as the ground of being, which is a very complex concept that, you can mutter that and people are left stunned, but they don't know what it means, and probably you don't either. The implication is that God and whatever is are somehow connected, so that if God is a part of my life, then the manifestation of that God would be that I might become all that I can be, and the more deeply I can be who I am, the more God becomes visible in and through my life. That's at least a starting point. And there's a great deal of contemporary theology that uses that. It's not unique with Tillich. He got it from a Greek philosopher at the end of the first century. But to that I add a couple of concepts. I think of God as the source of life, and I think life is holy, and I think it needs to be honored, and I think God is the source of love, and I think love is a powerful experience that enhances and creates life. And I can even quote the Bible to show that some people understood that a long time ago. The name of God in the Old Testament, the God of the burning bush, the name he gave, or God gave, was I am that I am. God is that which is. God is the ground of being. But we take all those ideas and we turn them into being a supernatural parent figure up in the sky, because basically human beings don't want to live without a parent figure that can take care of them. That's part of the anxiety of being human.
But there are other ways of thinking about God. This way that we have in the West of thinking about God in this very simplistic way as a personality is really only about 400 years old. And up until then, people had very much more Buddhist notions of the divine and the sacred as something you encounter within yourself, something that is a transcendence, but that you can never define, never explain. Once you think you've explained it, then you've got God in your pocket. And what you are in danger of doing is creating a God in your own image and likeness. God is not like that. The God is another reality that we have to search hard to find, and that can't be sort of contained and thought about in purely human terms like that.
Conceptually, no vision, no old man, young man, no male, no female. In regards to its function, love comes just about as close to it. Love as power of self-giving, love of power to call forth, love to free, and at the same time to lure into a particular direction. So wherever I started, that's God. Wherever I end, that's God. And in between, the divine presence that started me on my way insinuates itself in what happens in my life, but not just my life, but a communal sense of it. So there are different religious traditions. People get together and they think they discern it too. But it is almost always talking about something for which mystery is a larger percentage of it than the concreteness of verifiable truth.
But there's an awful lot of creative thinking going on in theology about how you talk about the divine experience. When I try to articulate that, I first of all recognize that you can't do it. That is, I don't see any reason to think a horse can tell you what it means to be human. I don't think there's any reason to think a human being can tell you what it means to be God. Now, a horse can experience a human being coming into its life, and I believe that human beings can experience the power of the divine coming into their life. But when you begin to articulate that experience, you inevitably fall back into the old code language of God as a man up in the sky somewhere. And that just, you know, we live on a lot of different levels, but that's not one that intellectually is viable any longer.
Yes, theology can never.
The implication is that God and whatever is are somehow connected, so that if God is a part of my life, then the manifestation of that God would be that I might become all that I can be, and the more deeply I can be who I am, the more God becomes visible in and through my life. That's at least a starting point. And there's a great deal of contemporary theology that uses that. It's not unique with Tillich. He got it from a Greek philosopher at the end of the first century. But to that I add a couple of concepts. I think of God as the source of life, and I think life is holy, and I think it needs to be honored, and I think God is the source of love, and I think love is a powerful experience that enhances and creates life. And I can even quote the Bible to show that some people understood that a long time ago. The name of God in the Old Testament, the God of the burning bush, the name he gave, or God gave, was I am that I am. God is that which is. God is the ground of being. But we take all those ideas and we turn them into being a supernatural parent figure up in the sky, because basically human beings don't want to live without a parent figure that can take care of them. That's part of the anxiety of being human.
But there are other ways of thinking about God. This way that we have in the West of thinking about God in this very simplistic way as a personality is really only about 400 years old. And up until then, people had very much more Buddhist notions of the divine and the sacred as something you encounter within yourself, something that is a transcendence, but that you can never define. Never explain. Once you think you've explained it, then you've got God in your pocket, and what you are in danger of doing is creating a God in your own image and likeness. God is not like that. The God is another reality that we have to search hard to find, and that can't be sort of contained and thought about in purely human terms like that.
Conceptually, no vision, no old man, young man, no male, no female. In regards to its function, love comes just about as close to it. Love as power of self-giving, love of power to call forth, love to free, and at the same time to lure into a particular direction. So wherever I started, that's God. Wherever I end, that's God. And in between, the divine presence that started me on my way insinuates itself in what happens in my life, but not just my life, but a communal sense of it. So there are different religious traditions. People get together and they think they discern it too. But it is almost always talking about something for which mystery is a larger percentage of it than the concreteness of verifiable truth.
But there's an awful lot of creative thinking going on in theology about how you talk about the divine experience. When I try to articulate that, I first of all but when you begin to articulate that experience, you inevitably fall back into the old code language of God as a man up in the sky somewhere. And that just, we live on a lot of different levels, but that's not one that intellectually is viable any longer.
Yes, theology can never tell us what God is. The great theologians were all very clear about that. They even said that it was better to say that God did not exist, because our concept of existence is far too limited to apply for God. God doesn't exist like this chair, or you or me, or the atom, an unseen reality that you can demonstrate and test out in a laboratory. God does not exist, says the great theologian Denis, the Areopagite. But God is there. God is reality, but of a different order of reality. In the same way as the Buddha would never define nirvana. He said, we haven't got the words or the concepts for it. You can only have sense nirvana if you empty yourself of self-importance and live a life of compassion. And similarly, Confucius, the same. He always preferred not to speak about heaven, the high God, or the Tao, and wished he could be silent. We talk too much often about God, and don't allow the silence in, and that means the mystery and the wonder and the knowledge that God is transcendent. That means it goes beyond what we can know or define. But very often when people say that, religious people, they say, yes, God is transcendent.
Can you reintroduce it near the end of the film?
Yeah,
it might have something to do with the busyness on the internet at this hour. I don't know, because it's worked really well normally. Yeah.
I've been getting messages saying that my internet connection is going bad. So
right, you've been freezing on us, and then when you freeze, the film freezes. So I think it is the internet right there.
Yeah.
Would you like to go towards the ending of it, or do we have enough to talk about?
We have plenty to talk about, I think. But if you can just try something near the end and see what happens, because they end on a good note too.
Okay. We'll give it a whirl here.
The whole thing is really quite profound.
Oh, yeah. Stop it right there. Joan Chittister.
It's Joan? Okay.
That's Joan.
Her paltry and wonderful little role in the cosmos, whatever that is. So it's when people are comfortable, to tell them that there may be more that we ought to be looking at can be quite threatening, sometimes more threatening than the answer, because they can simply reject the answer. But the question is what we're all steeped in right now. And that question is a scary one. Why next? Who next? These are major spiritual questions that simply living out certain religious exercises will not excuse us from.
We are desperately in need of another great awakening. I think we have come to what I call the advanced stage of secularization, in which the culture has lost the sense of transcendence, has lost a sense of the importance of the sacred, is so into the material acquisition, or into the power and pride of particular people, that something has to remind us that this is God's world, that God has not vacated the world, and that we need to look for contemporary signs of God's presence in a fresh way.
So I think that's where we are as a culture. We're on a journey into something brand new that's going to be wonderful. But we're scaring people because they feel like they've got to give up what they believed in the past, or there's nothing to believe in the future. So I think we got to get both beyond the fundamentalist reaction and beyond the secular humanist dismissal of all religion to see that there is something beyond both of those options and to begin to articulate that. So I think there's a great future. I don't want to call it religion because I think that's a difficult word, but there's a great future for what I would call a new human consciousness that involves the realm of the spirit, which is what I think we deeply are.
Well, I believe that we're in genuinely an embryonic time, an embryonic moment of new consciousness, new awareness, new social systems, new social demands, new cultural requirements. And I believe we do not dare abort the questions, because those are the questions that are moving us in all of the life issues. It's too early to come up with a lot of absolutes. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't be working off of good principles, holy principles, good Christian principles, while we work toward the answers. But we can't keep closing our minds to the possibility that we will need to keep living in faith and hope and love until we know more, till more of us know more, until we know it with some degree of certainty about how it applies.
And I think that after 9/11, after current bombings here and there, and then looking at our response to these things, the insecurity, the post-traumatic stress disorder, which warms itself over and over with every report of suicide bombers and so forth. I think in order for the world to face the future with bright prospects, there's got to be a revisitation of the Spirit in some widespread way, and I suspect it'll probably have to be interfaith. That whereas our great awakenings that we have talked about in church history were Christian revival movements, the world itself is so imperiled, whether or not it is Islam over against Christianity, or whether the Buddhists are claiming one end and the Hindus another in conflict. Somehow, wise people of multiple traditions are going to have to help us figure out, given the pluralism, given the many different traditions and religions that live together and are trying to struggle with how we come to peace and resolve our conflicts. You bring your wisdom. You bring your wisdom. Maybe we all bring our wisdom together. Perhaps the nation itself could experience some revitalizing force. And maybe in and around that, some symbolic metaphors may have much power to galvanize such a new movement.
The song of Dan Schutte, who has the one called Holy Darkness. And obviously, there's some of us really loving the pandemic, what that's doing for us, but there are some parts of it that also are painful. And he has this particular song that shows the hour of darkness also being a time of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And also, so anyway, we thought this might be a good closing hymn to, again, sing together. And myself, I don't have the best voice, so I usually put the mute on during the time, and just sing along with him in my heart, or in my room alone with you. So
Actually, I would suggest that so that we don't sing at different speeds through the internet. If we all muted ourselves and
Yeah.
then allow Dan to sing for us, but we can sing as loud as we want into our screens then.
Thank you. Thank you.
Holy darkness, blessed night, heaven's answer hidden from our sight. As we await you, O God of silence, we embrace your holy night. I have tried you in fires of affliction.
want to thank all of you for participating so generously with your journey and goodness. And we have more programs coming up. Elizabeth, do you know the next one? I was going to check it out, but I forgot. But anyhow, we're putting together a new flyer that's coming out in a couple days that will have all of our programs that are going to be done through this method of Zooming. And they'll be listed in there and so forth. And
I have the list here, Sister Marla.
Okay.
On June 4th, there's a program called Cell to Soul by Ron Corte. June 9th is Bringing Out the Good with Pat Pittons. On June 12th, I am going to be doing a program on what's your love language. And on June 30th, Sister Marla is going to be talking about Sister Thea Bowman.
Sister Thea Bowman is up for canonization process. And she's a classmate of mine from the novitiate days.
Oh, wow.
So I can make that quite personal. But anyway, she's an outstanding woman. But thank you for being so participative. And we are all learning the process. And I would say what I did the first session back about a month ago, and what we've done today here is an advance in our gifts of how to do all this. And the next time we'll probably have even some more pieces to add to it. So we welcome your feedback and whatever else, and look forward to all of you and others to join us in the future.